Hi there makers, it is Jo from Minerva and today I'm here with a learn to sew video, and today we're going to look at a technique for lining a jacket. There are lots of ways to line a jacket. If you're following a pattern that has a lining in it, then you'll be following through the instructions, but there are occasions when you might like the style of a jacket but it doesn't include the lining pieces, and there's lots of ways you can do it. You can have a turning point in all different places, but I'm just going to show you one today. It's one I felt was the easiest for people to hop on board with if they'd not lined a jacket before. So there's lots of different methods. If you've got a good method that you like, you can put it in the comments below, but I'm just going to show you one today, and hopefully if you've never done it before, it'll be a sort of entry level for you to line your own jacket. You might want to line a jacket for comfort so that it's easy to slip on and off. You might want to line a jacket because the fabric that you chose wasn't as firm as you thought, so you want to add a little bit of weight and substance with the lining. You might be wearing it with bare arms, so if you had a dress under here and you wanted this to be really nice and smooth against your skin, you might line it. Particularly, I'm used a brocade today. I will list the fabric, this fabric below. It's absolutely beautiful. Another brocade that I've got here would definitely be needing to be lined on a jacket because it's really quite rough and scratchy on the reverse. And that's kind of feature of brocade fabrics, because on the right side you want to really enjoy those metallic threads, but those metallic threads have got to go somewhere. So sometimes the reverse of the fabric can be a little bit uncomfortable. Also, you might be choosing to line your fabric so that you can have an item that you can wear between seasons, because then it's a little bit warmer or it has a little bit more weight and substance. You can use lots of different lining fabrics. You don't have to use just an acetate lining or a haboti lining. I've used a satin lining today inside this jacket, and this is the one that I'm going to be showing you. I've also used a different lining in the sleeve because that's a little bit lighter, but the one that might flash out and show people is here, and then the basic lining that's lighter is in my sleeve, because that way I've got a little bit more movement. There's a few things about lining that are key to all lining, so the hem is one of them, and the ease inside the jacket is another one. So you want to make sure that your lining is still comfortable for you to wear inside the outer of your jacket. Hope you find today useful, and do leave some comments below if you think you'd like to try it. First up, we're going to put the outer of this jacket together, because that is where you start. You want to make an outer and a lining and then find a way to put the two together. I've put together the outer bodice. I've attached my collar because all of this seam allowance is going to be inside the lining, so that will turn down and the lining will be around here. That's tacked on, because if I'm putting more than one layer on, I like to tack the middle layer so that it doesn't shift around. The darts are made, and because I'm using brocade, everything is overlocked. You might find that if you're using a different fabric, then you might just pink and shear the edges or just use a zigzag, but this fabric is particularly prone to fraying, so I have definitely made sure that nothing's going to fray back to the seam allowance once my jacket is complete and lined. So make up your outer jacket. Don't put the sleeves on in this method that I'm showing you today, because we're going to join our linings at the sleeve seam. Sometimes you might be doing those because you might be having your turning point at the bottom, but let's not confuse ourselves. We're just sticking with attaching the sleeves afterwards and the lining for those at the next stage. When you cut your lining for your jacket, you're going to use the same pattern pieces that you used to cut out the jacket, but there's a few little alterations. So first of all, you need to have an easing pleat at the neck here, so your shoulders will be here, so when you move your jacket you've got a little bit more room on the inside, because you don't want this to be really tight across from back arm to back arm. and it will make your whole jacket feel tight. So I put a pleat in the fabric, then put my pattern piece on the fold and cut it. That meant I didn't disturb the shape of the neck, so this neckline will still fit on my jacket. At the moment, I've got my lining piece cut the same size as my jacket, but I know that I will be taking some off here because there's a little folded facing, so I'll need to be trimming down my lining by that much. But I didn't want to guess that at the cutting table. I've just cut them out exactly the same, and then I can take the fabric back. It's better to have a little bit more fabric than a bit less. I've got this to the same stage. I've cut my lining in pink and shears. It's quite a thick Duchess satin lining, so this doesn't make a noise like acetate lining, and it's a little bit luxurious to go with the luxurious brocade. Let's match the outer and the lining together. I'm getting a few more layers now, especially with this bouncy brocade, so I'm going to start using clips. I'm going to match up the side seams, all the neck edge, because we're going to sew down the front, round the neck and down the other side. So this is where, if you're not following a pattern for lining a jacket, you want to add lining, then to a degree you are just matching up the pieces as you go along. Once I've gone around the neck edge and down the side, I'm now going to sew along the hem, but I need to leave a place, a turning place in the centre back or at the back side where I can turn the whole jacket through the hole at the bottom. So I'm going to sew from one edge into the one side, from the other edge, and I'm going to leave myself a turning gap here. This is the back piece. Let's go back to this in a minute and we'll see what happens when we turn it through. Essentially, once you've got it all folded out, you can then spend some time pushing your corners out, pressing your hems. You want to make sure that the lining is rolling to the inside. So take some time to get the jacket how you want it. You can use clips just to hold back any particular areas. I've got brocade, so I'm going to have to be a bit careful with my pressing, but you can press around with a press cloth until you get that finished look that you really want. Okay, there's a few things you'll notice when you're trying to press all of your jacket pieces together. So hopefully you'll notice that the lining is a little bit longer than the actual jacket, and that's fine. And you can hold it up and you'll see it hanging down, and you'll be really worried that you'll see the lining hanging down. But if you tried it on, because you've got a 3D body shape in there, or your shoulders and everything, then this has enough bellow and room to shift up. And you don't want it to be tight, because then you'll end up with a hem that's puckered up and pulls up against the lining. So your lining should be a little bit longer than your jacket, and you can just press a little crease in there, and then when you wear it, it can concertina back out. That's the same for your pleat at the back. This should give you some shoulder room. I top stitched in the ditch my collar down, so that's all sitting nicely. And you could have done a couple of things on this side edge. You could have cut your lining a little bit shorter. I made mine the full size, didn't I? But I could have cut it a little bit off and joined it onto here. Depends what sort of facing you've got. I just sewed the two exact shapes together, and then I folded it back, and it's made me a really nice thick button band. But that's because that suits this fabric. You might need to just spend a little head scratching time thinking how you would like to have this edge of your jacket. It might be that you've already got a facing piece that goes around the collar and you need to cut your lining piece as just the section that's missing out of that side front. Obviously, if you're following a pattern, you'll have all the pattern pieces and you can follow the instructions. So today, this is really if you've got no guidance at all and you're looking to line a jacket that isn't ordinarily lined. Don't be in too much of a rush to sew up the turning point, and really make sure that you've got the jacket how you want, because you can always flip this back out, you can try again, you can change the amount of lining that you've got and the amount of hem that's left over. You can definitely check you've got all your points turned out, if you've got any curved areas that just need to be smoothed along. And when you've tried it on and you're definitely sure it's how you want it, then you can hand sew up the turning point. Keep the same distance that you've got so that you're mimicking a machine line, and you can just do a little invisible stitch along there. So tunnel through the main fabric, nick some of the lining and tunnel through again. I'm going to work on the sleeves. I'm going to put the sleeves together. This is just in this technique, so you might have a different technique where you make the outer with the sleeves, you make the liner with the sleeves, and then you put them together with some hand stitching. But for today's one, I'm just showing you this sleeve method. Next, we can take a look at putting in the sleeves, and the first part of that is to tack together the lining and the sleeve so that they operate as one piece of fabric. You don't want them to be slipping and moving around. You'll want to put your sleeves right sides together and sew up the side seam. You need to be keeping the seam allowances. All lining of any item requires attention to detail on the seam allowance. However, if you make two identical pieces, you can get sometimes where your sleeves feel a little bit tight. So what I like to do is pin my sleeve side seam and mark my seam allowances at either end. I'm going to make sure that where I go off each end is touching those two marks. However, in between, I'm going to take a slightly smaller seam allowance so that my lining has a little bit of give in it, because there's nothing worse than having a sleeve that is the right size on the outside but the lining is too tight on the inside. You can't just take a smaller seam allowance altogether, otherwise this sleeve shape won't fit into your jacket and the other end of your sleeve, the cuff end, won't fit over here. So I'm going to keep the beginning and the end the same and then just grade in to give where I have my elbow a little bit more room. It's a real top tip. You can do the same on skirts. So if you're lining a skirt, make sure where it joins at the waist is the same seam allowance and the same at the hem, but you can grade out the seam allowance just a tiny little bit and it will make sure that it doesn't feel too tight over your hips and your bottom and around your tummy or anywhere else where it's close fitting. You'll notice that this lining is different to the one I lined the jacket with, because this is just going inside the sleeve. This is a much lighter one. And you can also switch up your lines on your jacket. So if you had a plain outer jacket, you could have a patterned lining, but I really recommend that you have something slippy for the arms. If you don't, the drag from the current item that you're wearing will make it really difficult to put a lined jacket on if it's not a slippy fabric. So I've got two slippy fabrics as it happens, but I could have swapped out my thicker one, my thick satin one, for a pattern fabric. It's just I had a heavily patterned fabric on the outside of my jacket. Once you've got the two parts of your sleeve, the lining and the outer, with right sides together, so that's the right side of the seam you're going to put the lining into the jacket, and you're going to pin the lining in place, but not matching the raw edges. If you match the raw edges, then the lining will drop too close and you'll end up with the lining showing below the cuff. So take your lining down, same distance all the way around, so you expose some of the cuff fabric. Obviously it's going to make it longer this end, but when we join that and match the raw edges, we'll have that little bit of extra ease of lining inside the sleeve. We don't want loads because we don't want to have lining rucking up on the inside, but a little bit of ease just makes it a really comfortable wear. We're going to sew around there, not sewing this. This is going to be cut off or left inside as a little bit of a stiffener facing. We're going to sew on the lining. Whatever you do on one sleeve, you need to do the same on the other sleeve. And if you want to tack it, tack this sleeve into your jacket and try it on for length, you can do that too. Whatever distance you allowed, then you make sure that it folds up that much. I've left that extra bit in, it's just given it a really nice stiffness, and I don't want to attack my brocade too much because it's a real fraying fabric, so I'm happy with it where it is. You can put a little hand stitch on the underarm seam and that will stop the lining from flipping out, or you can do a little stitch in the ditch there in the seam line. I've just pinned those raw edges together, but I don't need to do that. I was just checking that I'd got enough fabric in that sleeve to have that turn around. I'm going to press that and repeat with the other sleeve. Okay, it's time to put the sleeves into the jacket. But we don't want this lining to be attached yet, we just want the sleeve. It's all down in there, I can grab that later. I need to put right side to right side of the jacket. And I'm going to pin together all of those layers. So that's the body lining, the outer jacket and the outer sleeve. Got some notches to match up, so I'll do that first. And then I can pull up my easing threads and ease in the sleeve head. Once you've attached the sleeve, I've just clipped my lining. I'm not going to clip my fabric as well because it's brocade and I don't want it to fray, but you can clip both sides of your fabric. Reach in, find your lining. Now this is the last part of the process. You fold down the edge of the lining and pin it over the seam. I'll do a bit and then you'll be able to see it a bit more easily. So you fold it down and then fold it over the top. It is a little bit tricky to pin. You might just be pinning it in key points and then handling it when you hand sew it. Fold it over, cover over the seam allowance. That way you can't see where the seam allowance was, and you're going to hand sew around there with a hand stitch. You can whip stitch, you can do an invisible stitch, you can sew it on as best you can, but I would recommend that you keep the stitches quite close so that when you've got it on and you've got some tension under there, under your arm when your arms are moving, that it doesn't bust the seam. You can also try a double thread, that would make it stronger, and you can also wax your thread to stop it twisting while you're hand sewing. That's the hand stitching all the way around there, and then the sleeve is attached to the jacket. If you don't fancy that sort of hand stitching, or you don't have that kind of motor control, you can take a slight shortcut by inserting your sleeve only and then pulling up the lining, and you can do all 4 layers at once on the overlocker. And I mean it's not for everybody, but it depends what you want. So you can put all of those layers together and overlock all of that, or you can tack it all and then take it to the overlocker and overlock around. You won't get that sort of nice couture finish that you have there, where it's just an invisible sleeve or nicely hand sewn in. You will have an overlock edge, but if it's inside your jacket, it's a perfectly acceptable way of putting the sleeves in. And this is then the join where you put the sleeves on and you close up all of the lining. Here's an example of that armhole technique. So this was just a little bolero pattern, and it wasn't lined, but because of the fur lining I wanted to line it. And here, look, because of the fur and because it was quite thick, I wanted to squish all that down. So this sleeve and the lining and the outer jacket have all been overlocked together. It's on the inside. It actually makes it pretty durable, and that meant that round the hem I could have that nice sewn edge, so then I could flick out the fur, which I would have struggled to do if I was hand stitching. So there's an example of, if you don't want to do all that hand stitching and you've got an overlocker, you can overlock round. The other thing you can do, while we're talking about sleeve ones, is you can insert the sleeves into the jacket and then you can join here. So here you would have hand stitching, slip stitched all the way around. The only reason I don't like that is because I think then I've got a brocade and I think it just wouldn't last so long. So I prefer to have the machine stitch around there and the hand stitch around the arm. But you can do it the other way around, where you attach the arm and then you hand stitch around the cuff. So there's a couple of things to try, a few things to think about before you start putting your jacket together. I'm going to put the final sleeve in, same as the other one, and then I'll try it on and I can feel the ease. I can only tell you about what it feels like. I can't really show you, but I think it's important to see where all those folds and bits of ease that don't make the two pieces fit together absolutely flat, why they are there. There's the jacket complete, and although I can see that lining would hang down when I wear it, it doesn't. This is all really neat around here, and I've just got my closures to put on and have a lined jacket. The fabric that I'm wearing is a brocade, and I don't normally do it in a video because you obviously can't go and get it, but I have used a vintage pattern today. There are similar patterns like this. Tessuti have quite a few short cropped jackets that you could use brocade for, so there's a pattern company to go and check out. Thank you very much for watching. If you have lined something, we would absolutely love to see it, particularly the technique that you use, and also if you get to any problems, because sometimes if you're following instructions in a pattern, it's complex. You've got facings and collars and a back facing and all of these kind of things. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. On a pattern instruction, if you're lining, really take note of the key for right side and wrong side for your diagrams. That's one of the things that really helps you to make sure that everything is the right way round. We would love to see what you have been making, so do make a free account, make a profile, share your photographs and descriptions of what you've been up to, because it really does inspire both us and our sewing community. Do call again for more sewing tutorials. There are learn to sew ones, there's sew-alongs, full sew-alongs from start to finish, and there's starting to get some quite specific series on our Minerva YouTube channel where you can really sort and go to the specific place where you need to get the specific knowledge. Continue to enjoy your sewing journey and